Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You're watching Global Pulse with me, Neha Khanna. Another day, another attack on India by the Trump administration. Of course, each day it sounds more bizarre, illogical and personal. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt has said, US President Donald Trump imposed tariffs on India to deter Russia from pursuing the Ukraine conflict. Trump has doubled India's tariff to 50% by slapping an additional 25% levy on the previously announced 25% as punishment for buying Russian oil. Never mind the fact that in the early days of the Ukraine war, it was the US that actually encouraged India to buy Russian oil in order to stabilize the international oil markets. Now, the same United States is gunning for India with a vengeance, singling it out for its purchase of Russian oil and accusing it of fattening Putin's war chest. In fact, going by the vituperative attacks launched against India by key members of Trump's cabinet, you would have to be forgiven for thinking that it was India and not Russia that invaded Ukraine. Such is the absurdity of their arguments. They make it sound like India is the aggressor. Another Trump aide who's launched a barrage of attacks against India in recent days is US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. In interview after interview, Bessent has been asked by the American media why the Trump administration is singling out India for secondary sanctions while going soft on China, which happens to be the largest buyer of Russian oil. And in every interview, Bessent has sought to justify the punitive tariffs on India by making the most outlandish arguments which would be utterly laughable if they were not so outrageous. Accusing India of indulging in arbitrage, buying discounted Russian crude, refining it into fuels and reselling the products to Europe and other regions that have sanctioned Moscow, Bessent said, and I quote, "They are just profiteering. They are reselling. They've made $16 billion in excess profits, some of the richest families in India." Why no punitive tariffs on China, the largest consumer of Russian energy? Bessent says that's because Beijing had already been a large buyer of Russian oil before the invasion of Ukraine, while India dramatically increased its purchases after 2022. What's worse, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio recently argued that while India buying Russian oil meant adding to Russia's war coffers, China buying Russian energy is stabilizing the global oil markets. Make of it what you will. It's quite evident that there is no room for any logic or rationale in Trump's dealings with the world. The big bully makes all the rules, applies or bends them on a whim, and the world is just expected to live with it without ever challenging it and kowtow before the emperor or face grave consequences. Talking about American hypocrisy, consider this. Not only do China and Europe continue to buy large volumes of Russian energy without facing any sanctions, take a look at how the United States has been doing business with Russia. It was Putin who stated publicly during his recent summit with Trump that trade between the two countries had grown by as much as 20% since Trump returned to the White House earlier this year. In 2025, so far, the United States has imported fertilizers worth $927 million from Russia. As of June 2025, the US had imported palladium worth $594 million from Moscow, And the US under Trump has also imported $755 million worth of uranium and plutonium from Russia in the first 6 to 7 months of 2025. And let's not forget, it is Trump who rolled out the red carpet for Putin in Alaska. He is pushing Ukraine to accept a peace deal favorable to Moscow. And he seems very keen to improve US-Russia ties, especially in the area of trade. That's the level of staggering hypocrisy we are dealing with. Amidst the mind-bending arguments and attacks by the US, India's time-tested friend Russia has come forward to express solidarity and support for New Delhi. While addressing a press conference today, Russian Deputy Chief of Mission in India, Roman Babushkin, said the US pressure on India over the latter's procurement of Russian crude oil is unjustified and unilateral. The US behaves like a neo-colonial power that thinks only of its own benefit. He added, India is welcome to export its products to Russia if it's facing trouble entering the US market. Taking aim at Washington, Babushkin said, as we all know, sanctions are a tool of unlawful competition. It's always about double standards, a lack of trust, blackmail and pressure, as well as disrespect of national interests. Friends, don't behave like that. The Russian diplomat also said Moscow is committed to resolving any challenges that the India-Russia relationship might face. He confirmed that President Putin is expected to visit India by the end of the year. Both Russia and China, amongst others, have slammed Trump for exerting illegal trade pressure on India. The Russian diplomat's remarks also come at a time when India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is on a 3-day visit to Russia and is expected to meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And as we mentioned, Putin is expected to visit India later this year. Besides, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was in New Delhi for 2 days this week, and Prime Minister Modi is scheduled to travel to China for the SCO summit at the end of the month. The question we're asking on Global Pulse tonight is this: what exactly makes Trump think that squeezing India will make Putin end the war in Ukraine? And more importantly, is it time for India to bolster its ties with BRICS nations at a time when the United States is clearly treating it as an adversary?
The president has put tremendous public pressure to bring this war to a close. He's taken actions, as you've seen, sanctions on India and other actions as well. He's made himself very clear that he wants to see this war end, and he has scoffed at the ideas of others that have been raised that we should wait another month before any meeting takes place. The president wants to move, and he wants to bring this war to an end as quickly as possible.
If you go back and look now, I believe India had less than 1% of their oil, 1%, and now I believe it's up to 42. So
wow.
India is just profiteering, or they are just profiteering. They are reselling. They've made $16 billion in excess profits, some of the richest families in India. So this is a completely different thing. Like this India, what I would call the Indian arbitrage, buying cheap Russian oil, reselling it as product, has just sprung up during the war, which is unacceptable.
If the Indian goods are facing difficulties entering the U.S. market, the Russian market is, would welcome Indian imports to the most extent possible. So don't worry about that.
Russia provides 40% from this amount. Practically half. Practically half. As for discount, see, it's a commercial secret, I think, because it's usually just dialogue between businessmen. And approximately, usually 5%.
All right, let's now go straight across to our panel of experts. Joining me on Global Pulse tonight is Dr. Walter Anderson. He is the director of the South Asia Studies program at the School of Advanced International Studies at the Johns Hopkins University. He joins us live from Virginia in the United States. So great to have you on this show. We're also joined by Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former Indian diplomat. A very warm welcome to both my guests. Dr. Walter Anderson, let me begin with you. Karoline Leavitt says Trump has imposed secondary sanctions on India in the hope of ending the Ukraine war. Marco Rubio says India buying Russian oil fattens Putin's war chest, but China buying Russian oil actually stabilizes the international oil market. And Scott Besson says, China was already buying a lot of oil from Russia, but India increased its purchases in the course of the war. Fact is, sir, that there seems to be no logic or rationale in the arguments that are being extended by the Trump administration. Most people here and elsewhere seem to believe that Trump has singled out India for these punishing tariffs while going soft on China, the European Union, and even Russia for that matter, since his meeting with Putin in Alaska. And that Trump is doing it for completely extraneous reasons that may have little or nothing to do with trade or Russian oil. This seems more and more personal. That's the feeling here in India. What is your take?
First, let me say that I'm the former head of the South Asia program at Johns Hopkins. I'm now retired for the last 2 years. But in answer to your question is on what motivates the U.S. to take a stand. A lot of people who follow India closely in the U.S. Were shocked, have been shocked. And one only has to read the press. Fareed Zakaria wrote a wonderful piece in the Washington Post yesterday arguing that this makes no sense at all. And I think partly a reason that you gave is there's a personal aspect to this. Prime Minister Modi and the Indians generally have not accepted the fact that President Trump was able to mediate and work out the deal on the India-Pakistan problems that they had between each other. And then India has not, indicated it's going to cut off, the purchase of Russian oil. So there is, I think what's happening here is, from Trump's perspective, is that his goal of having, of working out the biggest issue that he faces in terms of foreign policy is the Ukraine situation. He said he would, bring peace to the region. And I think in his mind, India is a problem in that it is providing the funds for Russian to fight the war. I'm not sure that that's true, even on its face. But the fact is, he's willing to throw India under the bus, unlike China, and I must say Pakistan either. He's developed a fancy relationship with Pakistan because it has appealed to his ego. One only has to see the aspect of ego. If you look at the meeting that were held recently over the weekend between the European leaders and Zelensky. I and a group of friends watched it, and we couldn't believe what we were hearing. Everyone was bowing as if and kissing the finger, as if that were, something that was necessary to do. And unfortunately, it may be, somewhat necessary, is to develop a kind of fawning, to the U.S. president. He can get away with it in a sense because of the power of the U.S. The fact that people want the U.S. market, and so are willing to do a lot. I must say, I think Prime Minister Modi and the External Affairs Minister have been very wise in keeping a mild reaction to what has been happening. And if it were me, I don't think I would have taken such a mild reaction. But then I'm not, a position of power. So, but I think they're to be commended for having taken a mild role and hoping that there's a way out of all of this. The U.S. had based a strong relationship with India on the assumption, this has been true for years now, at least 2 decades, that a strong India was suited U.S. interests with or without a military alliance. And I think the U.S. had come to recognize a military alliance was not likely. But a strong India in and of itself, satisfied that objective. And we in fact, in the last, decade or so have been moving closer to India in terms of military issue. There's the formation of Quad, for example. and that was directed, as a hedge against an assertive China. I think what's going to happen as a consequence of this is that Indian manufacturers, if the U.S. follows through to have 50+% increase in tariffs, will have to look out elsewhere for markets. I say that from a very personal perspective. My wife owns a factory, and her biggest customer is the U.S. It's not the only one; it's the biggest one. But she's going to have to look out elsewhere, and she's in fact doing that already. She has sold in Japan and in Germany and other places in Europe, and uh, and the UK is a perspective because there's no tariff between India and the UK. So this is a problem for many small manufacturers such as her, and particularly in her field, which is apparel. So it's there's a lot of negotiations I think that have to happen. But I think what
Mhm.
I think India so far has been wise in its response on the ego question, and I think it has to sort of negotiate. With India, and it was open. It was supposed to have negotiations. The U.S. was supposed to send a delegation to India, and that has been called off. And
That's been called
so,
off.
for reasons I'm not sure. I think it's because maybe Modi hasn't decided on the whole question of of purchases of oil. So, I think we stand there, and I think, that besides, India maintaining its, national sovereignty in this case, is it's going to look more closely at China. In fact, we know already the Prime Minister is going to China, and look more closely at at the European Union and at um, uh, the UK for business deals. And so my wife, in fact, is part of that. And so, in a sense, I get a sense of how that is moving. It's difficult to do. Hopefully, the Indian government can come up with some kind of assistance program for people in her position, because if you in an aggregate have hundreds of thousands of workers whose jobs are at stake here.
Yes. So I want to come back and expand a little bit on the geopolitical realignments that you just referred to. And you said India's response has been wise and restrained. Well, would say that's what mature democracies do, something that Trump seems to know little or nothing about. Let me bring in Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee at this point. Ambassador Mukherjee, you heard Dr. Walter Anderson. Many in India also feel that Trump has acted against India out of personal pique, that if, like the European leaders and Zelensky and everybody else, India too had bowed before the emperor, kissed the ring, maybe we would not be in this situation today, but then we are a proud, self respecting, independent, mature democracy that has chosen to stand up for itself and defend its strategic autonomy. But the question that I want to ask you is, what do you make of the increasingly bizarre, illogical, and irrational arguments that are being made by members of the Trump administration on a daily basis as they tie themselves up in knots trying to explain why they've singled out India for these secondary sanctions while sparing China, or in this instance, perhaps Russia itself? Remember, Trump had threatened Putin with severe consequences if there was no ceasefire at the end of the Alaska summit. But look how pro Putin he sounds now.
Well, Neha, you've partially answered your own question in the sense that clearly in the very elite school that President Trump went to when he was a kid, they didn't teach any world history. That is why he earlier used to repeatedly say that India and Pakistan have had problems for thousands of years. Uh,
Yes.
so he didn't know that Pakistan had been created in 1947. Similarly, he probably doesn't understand that a colonized nation of 1.4 billion people, colonized by white people for 188 years, are not going to bow and scrape before him, as we saw the rather unfortunate spectacle. And I have a lot of respect for some of those leaders of the European Union who were lined up the way you are in front of the principal's office waiting for an interview. They were waiting to get in. We all noted that President Zelensky was wearing what we in India call a bandgala without a tie. He was sporting enough to make a joke about it when he was asked about it. But the whole issue is that it is personal pique. Why? Because we politely but firmly indicated that Operation Sindoor was brought to a temporary end when the Pakistani DGMO asked our DGMO that they were ready for a ceasefire. Moreover, unlike the Pakistanis, who for their own reasons then immediately congratulated Trump for having orchestrated the ceasefire, we not only denied it, but we also did not do what the Pakistanis have done, which is to dash off a letter to the Peace Committee nominating President Trump for the Peace Prize. This has hurt his personal ego deeply because he thinks, look at this nation of poor people, brown people, so much of poverty, they should be groveling before me, begging me, please, President Trump, don't impose your extra tariffs. We are ready to do whatever you would like us to do. Don't do this to us, etc. Instead of which, we have played it very cool. We are the nation of Chanakya. We have not overreacted. In fact, we have reacted very mildly. And in the meantime, we are resetting our strategic autonomy. We are looking for other strategic partners. We've already had an extremely important visit by the Chinese foreign minister and many impediments to the Sino-Indian trade relationship have been removed, for instance, with regard to rare minerals and a lot of other stuff. And our Prime Minister is going to be going for the SCO summit, and we are preparing for a visit by President Putin to India. What does this show? It doesn't show that we've become hostile to America. It shows that we are a nation that believes in self respect. We will not be publicly humiliated and kicked around and told that India, you're profiteering, you are the nation more guilty than China. Yes, China buys a lot of Russian oil. They always did so. But you, India, you went from 1% to 43%. You're profiteering. You're trying to make money. You're trying to make. So I would like to ask, what is the United States but a nation of profiteers? How did it first establish itself? The United States is the first nation in the world to embrace capitalism. They should be glad that India has also embraced capitalism. What is capitalism but going for profit? And secondly, to give the erroneous impression that India is fueling the Ukrainian conflict as if we are the ones who marched inside Ukraine's borders
Exactly.
is again completely, I won't even use the word ridiculous because it's undiplomatic. It's very untimely. But what President Trump also doesn't understand, never mind if he didn't learn any world history in school. There are a lot of Americans who don't know any history at all. That's fine. Nobody helps because they think the only history and geography that matters is of the United States. No problem. But he should have been smart and savvy enough to understand that India is a great business deal because he believes in business. India is a great business deal. Moreover, for decades now, every American president has had huge approval ratings all over India, even when their approval ratings were very low in United States. What he has done is he and some other members, like the Treasury Secretary, etc., have single handedly demolished the India US strategic partnership. There is huge anti Americanism all over India. Indians are furious. We are a raucous, large democracy. They are the world's oldest democracy. He has destroyed the relationship. So,
Yeah.
we were a great business deal. We were a great strategic partner. We did not kiss his ring or bend and tie his shoelaces in the Oval Office. So we have been put down. The manner in which the unfortunate President Zelensky was asked why is he badly dressed when he came to meet Trump. That was so horrifying, Neha. I have never in
Yes.
my entire life ever thought that a head of state of a country could be so publicly humiliated as
Being
Zelensky was.
humiliated and badgered over what he wore. They're so obsessed with Zelensky's suit or absence of it. And it's not just the jabs about the suit. We all recall that humiliating shouting match that occurred when Zelensky was ambushed by Trump and J.D. Vance in the Oval Office in the month of February.
Yes, it was actually, it made me feel, Neha, that is this what the Brits subjected us to when we were colonized? Is this neo-American colonialism? Is this how the big emperor behaves with his small petty subjects? In other words, the United States does not anymore believe under President Trump in equal sovereign relations between sovereign member states of the UN. He believes that we are serfs or slaves and the Americans are our masters. Well, we can't accept that in India. Maybe poor Zelensky had to do it because it's a much smaller nation and he's in a difficult situation. But to
Okay.
expect a nation like India to accept that is impossible. To expect Prime Minister Modi to accept it or our External Affairs
Absolutely.
Minister, because they were very badly briefed, and unless they back down, we are certainly not backing down. We don't
Doesn't
back
look
down.
like India is backing down or compromising on its principles of strategic autonomy and basic
Yeah.
self-respect. And okay, let me take this back to Dr. Walter Anderson. Dr. Anderson, while some are saying that Trump is behaving like an emperor and the US like a neo-colonial power, many others actually say he is exactly like a schoolyard bully. But that apart, I want your thoughts on what happened here in New Delhi earlier today. The Russian embassy held a press conference where the deputy chief of mission said that what the US is doing with India in terms of tariffs is completely unjustified and unilateral. This is how new colonial powers behave. Friends do not behave like this. And India is welcome to export its products to Russia if it's facing trouble entering the US market. You mentioned earlier that, Prime Minister Modi is slated to visit China at the end of this month. The Chinese Foreign Minister was in New Delhi over the last couple of days. As we speak, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is in Moscow. He's going to meet his Russian counterpart tomorrow. President Putin is very likely to travel to India later this year. There are now many who say, Dr. Anderson, that it is time for India to bolster its ties with other BRICS nations, including Russia and China. In fact, it's very interesting. We had a Chinese guest on the show last night who said it is BRICS that keeps Donald Trump awake at night. And that is really where countries need to focus. It's another matter that he also said that it's the Epstein files that are also keeping Donald Trump up at night. Could you hear me, sir?
No, I couldn't. I heard your first part of it, but I didn't hear the last part of it. I think he must have asked something requesting a response from me, but I didn't hear that. Could you?
No worries, sir. I will repeat my question. If you can hear me now. Can you hear me now, sir? Okay, I'll repeat my question. So the question I want to ask you is that, Russia today expressed solidarity with India, saying that if India is having trouble selling its products in the US market, it is welcome in the Russian market. There are many who are saying it is time for India to bolster its ties with Russia, China and other BRICS nations at a time when it's under an unprecedented attack from the United States. Do you believe that is the way to go? A Chinese guest on our show last night said it is BRICS that keeps Donald Trump up at night. What's your take?
I'm not sure anything keeps him up all night. To be quite frank, he is a firm believer in himself, and he has backing him the inherent wealth of the U.S. That's his strength. That's what he uses to his advantage. I think, as do any so a lot of thoughtful people in the U.S. Think that that he's thrown India under the bus, to use a U.S. phrase, and for what purpose? India actually was not only an important business partner, but in terms of strategic interests, I think on something
Okay,
as well.
go
But
ahead,
I
sir.
think that under the present circumstances, the very little that's happening that would restrain India from the natural thing of getting some leverage and also some benefits from ties with China and with Russia and the other states as well as other countries in the world. Uh, we'll have to see, whether Trump changes his behavior or not. Uh, I'm not optimistic because one of the problems is, to be quite frank, is not solely his. Is that Trump did invade Ukraine, and he talks about root causes, but that's a separate discussion. And the thing is, the relationship. It looked as if the relationship between Trump and Putin was improving, and that Russia might be moving in a direction kind of so Trump believed. I'm not sure that's the case. I think Putin has larger and ideas regarding Ukraine, which he actually thinks is somehow an invalid. That issue is going to stay around, and that's going to have probably a negative impact on U.S. and India relations. So, India may have to, at least in the interim, until something's worked out there, uh, work out some kind of relationship with its business and the rest of the world. And here again, I think of my wife who's looking at other countries as sources, as well as the Indian market, because the Indian market, I mean, she manufactures middle class children's clothing, and you now have growing Indian middle class, which is looking for purchasing some items.
Okay.
So,
Let me take this to
did I
okay, go
answer
ahead, sir. Okay.
your question?
Okay, we apologize for the poor
Hello.
video quality there. Dr. Anderson, we're having a bit of a trouble, hearing you at this point. So we'll fix the line and come back to you. Let me take this Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee at this point. Ambassador Mukherjee, like you rightly said, many people here believe that Trump has completely destroyed the India-US relationship that was so painstakingly built. With a consensus in both countries over the last 30 years. There are many who are now saying that it is time for India to invest more in its relations with BRICS nations. And then there are those who say RIC is an idea whose time has come. What's your take on that?
I think, Neha, that the India US relationship is larger than Trump. And therefore, when Trump goes away, a lot of damage control will be done on both sides. Please don't forget that after all, in 1971, we weathered the combined hostility of Nixon and Kissinger. Uh, Kissinger actually even sent the Seventh Fleet to bomb Kolkata harbor. Uh, that was just before the liberation of Bangladesh. If we could have got through that when we were a much smaller, much weaker nation with a much smaller economy, I think we can weather this. We are the world's fastest growing economy. We're going to be at number three slot in a 4 years time, etc. Whether Trump likes it or Trump doesn't like it, it really doesn't make any difference. The point here is that people in India also believe, Neha, that Trump and his acolytes don't want India to rise, just as they tried to suppress China's rise, which they couldn't, and they thought that India would be like a pole, which would be a balancing pole between China and United States. Now they think that, oh, this India is getting too big for its shoes. This India should also be brought down a peg or two. This India is rising too fast. Therefore, that is also a big shock to all of us here, 1.4 billion Indians who thought America is our best friend, to see that our best friend wants to take us down a peg or two. In the meantime, we have completely changed our approach to FTAs. We've got a great FTA with UK. We are on the verge of concluding an FTA with the EU. We are looking on how to improve the present FTA with ASEAN. And we are definitely going to do trade in a big way with China. And we are certainly not going to stop buying Russian oil just because people in Trump's administration and Trump think it's profiteering. It's not profiteering at all. In fact, it is in India which has helped to keep global oil prices down, not China. By doing what we did, by refining it and then giving it back to the EU, for that matter, we have actually helped keep global oil prices down. Oil prices would be, and maybe what he needs to do is to get some of the very bright economists who are there in US. Most of them are of Indian origin, I'm told. He should get one or two of them in the White House to advise him on how to handle the relationship with India. And he should also tell our huge Indian diaspora in United States, which runs Silicon Valley, which keeps up their medical structure, which does so much to make America great. We should tell them to write to President Trump and say that he is treating India like an enemy country, like
Yes.
like a country that is inimical to America instead of being one of its closest strategic partners. We sacrificed a lot in our relationship with the Chinese because we wanted to be close to the US. That's why Quad came about. And I'd like to ask you, Neha, what is going to happen to the Quad summit in September, where Trump was supposed to attend the Quad summit here in India? It's in India. What is going to happen to Quad? Quad was supposed to be to establish a rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific. And who was supposed to be the adversary of the US? China. So, what does President Trump and his advisors have to say about that? Does he want to abolish Quad? Does he want to abolish AUKUS? Does he want the Chinese to go and annex Taiwan? What is he doing? He is giving completely wrong signals, and he is trying to make out that these signals are what suits his profiteering instinct. He is profiteering from this new coziness with Pakistan because
Exactly.
of the special interests of his family. So I would not say that India is profiteering. I am saying that President Trump is profiteering for his family. It
I
may
couldn't
not
agree
necessarily
more.
be
In
US.
fact, I
It's
want to
not
I wanted to come to that. I wanted to come to that, Ambassador Mukherjee. If you just give me a minute, I want to expand on that aspect. And if I could take this to Dr. Walter Anderson at this point. Dr. Anderson, while most here in India believe that Donald Trump has dealt a body blow to the India-US relationship that has been painstakingly built over the last 3 decades, there are a lot of questions being asked about just what explains Trump's newfound love for Pakistan and its army chief, Asif Munir. There are a lot of reports that suggest that Trump's own family and his special envoy,
I
Steve
now
Witkoff's family, have invested in Pakistan's crypto council, and it is those interests that seem to be driving Trump's Pakistan policy at the moment. What do you make of it, sir?
I'm not sure they're driving it, but there's certainly one element in it. I must say it's rather shocking, if in fact true, that the crypto industry, in which the president himself, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some element of truth to that, and I think that'll work against him in the long run, certainly politically in the United States. In fact, there are a number of editorials by some of the major journalists here who are now writing, in shock at, as it were. Um, India clearly, Pakistan clearly it doesn't have the advantage of India in terms of either as well. And what will happen? I heard this. You had mentioned the potential of, let's say, China begins to get assertive again. With India, or acquiesce, very problematic in much of Southeast Asia, and certainly in Japan, one of our major allies. And so, I'm not sure how it's going to end. I'm not optimistic it's going to end well. I think you're going to have a perpetuation of the war in Ukraine. That's going to have a collateral impact on the U.S. and India. And I fully agree. I don't think there's any reason for India legitimately to stop its purchase. It may, in fact, begin to do some other things that might try to please the president, like buying more weapons from the U.S., perhaps a bit more, as the Indian energy requirement, grows and it needs to import much of it, is to use the U.S. to do that, because the U.S. today is the world's largest, source of oil and gas. So, those are steps that might be taken. I think we have to watch to see what's going to happen on the international stage, because one of the tragedies of all this, it's not just India and the U.S. or, the value of India or lack of it to the U.S. that's driving the relationship with the U.S. It's other things as well as something much more imponderable, the ego of the president. And so that's why I brought up, the meeting on Saturday of the various European leaders and President Zelensky. They obsequious toward the President of the United States. And that seems to have kind of worked in a way that, that he began to give greater consideration to the idea of a ceasefire, which he had actually dumped, in favor of what the Russians want, which is to working towards a long-term peace agreement. But that, of course, takes a long time. And of course, the Russians have always wanted time, works to their benefit on Ukraine. And it's certainly not to the benefit of the Europeans. I would be, interested if the Europeans were collectively to put some pressure on the Russians to enhance their, to be more careful in how you deal with India. But I must admit, as in India, in the U.S., there is in the bureaucracy a strain of anti-Indian sentiment that has been there, and I know that as well since I used to be in the State Department, and there were certain elements where you could always point out. And I think you find a very similar situation in India as well. There has long been what should I say, a sentiment that has looked perhaps, with a lot of justification as a problem for India. That has not been the case, though. In fact, you had in both governments a drift toward seeing the other one in more favorable terms, because the other one was important for their interests of each other. That, for some reason, this is what shocked people here, is that seems to be not of significant importance anymore. And so I think we have to see, the reaction of India. Here again, I want to reiterate, I think the Indians have been very cautious in handling this issue.
Yes, Indians are being cautious, but I can tell you that the anti-America sentiment here, yes, is at an all-time high, sir. And the misgivings about Trump.
My wife is there now. I speak to her frequently.
Yes, you're quite right, sir. And
Trump isn't necessary.
Okay, we apologize for. Yes, we apologize for that poor connection there. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, I want to ask you two questions. Dr. Anderson there talked about a certain anti-India sentiment that seems to be prevalent at least in the Trump administration. We've had guests on this show talk about how, Indian think tanks and lobbies seem to have very insignificant presence on Capitol Hill and in the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. And Pakistan seems to have played that country much better than India. What's your take on that?
My take is more nuanced, Neha, because we are fully aware as professional diplomats that there is an American deep state, which we had thought would improve after Trump started demolishing the American deep state. That American deep state has been anti-Indian. Moreover, because of the very cozy relationship due to historical factors, Afghanistan, etc., between the Pentagon, the American military, and the Pakistani military, there has been a, a, a kind of military to military contact, which has also influenced anti Indian sentiment in the Pentagon, in the State Department, and in the deep state. When Trump came to power, we had thought that since he wanted to change and to make fundamental reform in what he considered was a deep state that was not aligned to making America great again, MAGA interests, it would actually shift in our favor. On the other hand, when you talk about lobbies, there has been talk about the Pakistani hired lobbyists in Washington being more effective than us. I'm not so sure on that. The point here is that you have a maverick American president, highly transactional, thinking of his own interests and his family's interests. Therefore, coming to the conclusion that, for instance, it makes sense to cozy up to this so called field marshal who lost Operation Sindoor and became a field marshal for that. Uh, it makes sense because that field marshal is being able to make good deals for him in Pakistan and weakening the democratic structure of Pakistan, including the very weak uh, government, which is democratically elected, so called civilian government. So, under those circumstances, I think that it is the president's personal prejudice against India after the Operation Sindoor concluded, his anger that India was the only country that did not cave in and accept what he has now said at least 37 times now in public.
Yes.
Maybe he mumbles in his sleep at night, who knows? That it was because of United States that he got India and Pakistan to cease hostilities. And therefore, it was incumbent upon India, like the Pakistanis did, like the Field Marshal did, like the Pakistani Prime Minister did, like the others have done, the other acolytes, that we did not nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think he is also angry at the fact that our reactions to everything is done. First putting 25%, then threatening us with another 25%. And please don't forget, Neha, the 25% was in addition to the existing 10%. So it's
Yes.
10% plus 25% plus 25%.
Yeah.
He is very angry that we have not shown anger, we have not reacted publicly, we have not gone to him begging with a begging bowl,
Yeah.
as the Americans used to depict us in the 60s when they sent us PL 480 rice. You were not born at that time, Neha. When PL 480 rice was sent by the Americans as food aid to India, I have eaten that PL 480, not rice, wheat, which was condemned for American cattle. That wheat condemned for American cattle was good for these poor ex-colonized brown natives of India. I have eaten that wheat, I can assure you, Neha. It is not edible. It's full of stones and insects. Okay? So from that approach, from that new American imperialist approach to today, I would ask the viewers watching you, what has changed then? Has America really changed? Or does America really look at India with so much contempt? Poor country, neo-colonized, now talking big, trying to be equal. In other words, does the American president believe in the sovereignty of nations, that everyone who has signed the UN Charter and is member of the UN is equal? Or does he believe that there is one supremo, that is President Trump and the United States, and everyone else has to kowtow before him? In that case, he's got a very big shock coming to him, because all these things he's unleashing on different countries, including India, is going to come right back and damage the American economy. That includes pharma, that includes gems and jewels, that includes a
Yes.
lot of stuff that is good for America, that's good for his MAGA base.
Yes.
So he wants to
You're
do
quite right.
fine.
This is going to definitely blow back on Trump and the American economy. Wonder who's advising Donald Trump, or maybe he just doesn't want to listen to anyone at all. One of our guests last night, in fact, said that Trump is unable to come to terms with the fact that the American empire is in decline. You're quite right, ma'am. India chose not to bow before Donald Trump. He wants everyone to thank him, everyone to express their gratitude to him, everyone to appease his ego. That's something India hasn't done, and clearly that's not gone down well with Donald Trump. And it's also so ironical that a man who's clamoring for a Nobel Peace Prize is enabling and patronizing a terrorist state like Pakistan. Very quickly, ma'am, I need to wrap up the show now. Yes.
I just wanted to say that somebody should tell Donald Trump that in India we don't ever bow. That's a very Western concept. In India we do namaste.
Okay.
Because we hold our
Okay.
hands together to welcome the guest. We never bow. We never bow to the Brits. We're not going to bow to him. That's my last word on the
Absolutely.
subject.
I think that's very well put. You've spoken for all of us, really. We're Indians. We do not bow. This is perhaps proving to be a tough lesson for Donald Trump. Let's see how things pan out. Will those punitive 25% tariffs kick in come the 27th of August, or is the Trump administration going to put a stay on it? That remains a big question at this point as India continues to navigate these rather choppy waters in the Trump era. On that note, Dr. Walter Anderson and Ambassador Parvati Mukherjee, thank you so much for joining me on Global Pulse tonight.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. So the big question really is, what happens to Donald Trump's decision of imposing those 25% punitive tariffs on India that are supposed to come into effect from the 27th of August? Is he going to pause it like he's done for China and Russia, or is he going to continue gunning for India? Watch this space for more. Thanks very much for tuning into Global Pulse. This is me, Neha Khanna, signing off.